This is J. Krishnamurti's first public talk in San Francisco, California, 1975.
If one may point out, this is not an entertainment, nor a complicated explanation of some philosophy, nor is it a gathering of a people who have to be told what to do. More and more, with all the things that are going on in the world, the catastrophes, the misery, the violence, one seeks to run away from it through some form of entertainment, amusement, or merely to accumulate knowledge. And it would be a great mistake if this gathering, this meeting, becomes a kind of amusing, intellectual explanation, entertainment, and in which you, as an audience, as you, a person, do not take a part. As we said also, this is not a philosophy brought over from India, a system of thought which you can copy, imitate, conform to. But it is a serious affair, a sustained investigation, inquiry into several things with which we are confronted. Among them is this question of communication. Communication implies that both the person who receives and the person who gives should at the same time think together, share together, take a journey together. All that is implied in that word, communication. To think together, to share together, to bear the responsibility of what is communicated. But it does not imply agreement or disagreement. But it does require that both the speaker and you who are listening should together think out seriously, go into the problems that we are confronted with, And that means a quality of listening in which there is not merely the acceptance of the meaning of a word, but go behind the word, because language is necessary to communicate. Words must be employed to convey what one wants to say. But behind the word, there is a great deal, the overtones, the significance, the deeper meaning of a particular word. And that means a quality of attention in which both of us are deeply concerned over the enormous problem of living with all its complexity. A quality of attention which is sustained, continuous, for we are going to investigate together the problem of freedom, the problem of discipline, the problem of self-knowledge. Freedom implies, does it not, that you must not follow anyone. You must be free to inquire, not accept, not look to a guide, to a system, to a savior, to a guru, to a swami, to a various forms of inundation that is coming from India to this country. Freedom implies that one must have the capacity to inquire, not what others say, but to inquire within oneself, to inquire, to investigate, to examine the whole structure of a human mind. That's our mind, your mind. And so freedom means, really, does it not, that any form of conformity, imitation, according to a pattern, a mold, does not allow free inquiry. And what we are going to talk about this evening demands that you be free to listen not only to the word, but the meaning of the word, and not be a slave to the word, and not accept whatever the speaker says or deny what he says, but to listen to find out. To find out for yourself, not according to some interpretation, not according to some other speaker, to find out for yourself the truth or the falseness of what is being said. So freedom is not to do what you want to do. That's not freedom at all. And I think probably that freedom has brought about great misery in the world, each one doing exactly what he wants to do. And that is rampant in this country, where there is no tradition, where there is no discipline. I'm using the word discipline totally in a different sense, which we'll go into presently. Where Christianity has become what it has, a meaningless structure, an entertainment, a carnival. And this country is inundated, flooded by gurus, yogis, swamis from India, and they are collecting not only coins but disciples, which totally denies freedom. Freedom does not imply choice. One thinks one is free if you can choose. We do not know if we have ever gone into this question of choice. You have vast array in front of you, the various teachers, yogis, philosophers, scientists, psychologists, analysts, bombarding your mind constantly, day in and day out. And among these array, you are going to choose who you think you should follow, who you should think you should listen to. So you choose according to your temperament, according to your desire, according to your pleasure. Please do listen to this, if you will, carefully, because you are confronted with this problem. When so many of them are telling you, follow this and don't follow that, or do this and do that. And you are forced or faced with the question of whom to listen to and whom to follow. Whether that yogi, that philosophy, that guru. I wish the word guru never existed in this country. Because there's quite a different meaning that that word in Sanskrit means weight. It also means one who dispels ignorance. And it does not mean the one who imposes on another his ignorance. You laugh. But you still want to follow somebody. You still want to be told. So you're not free. And it is absolutely necessary to be free to find out what is true and what is false for yourself, which no one can tell you. No system, no philosophy, no guru. And when you face this array of teachers, philosophers, and systems, you're forced, because you yourself are confused. Life has become terrible, painful, uncertain. There is so much poverty, threat of destruction, violence. As you want to escape from all that, you're forced to choose one of these. And your choice is based upon your confusion, naturally. Whether to follow, to listen to that yogi, to that guru, to that philosopher. So you begin to depend on yourself, thinking you are free to choose. The background of choice is invariably confusion. Aren't you confused when you choose? Aren't you uncertain when you pick one amongst all these? So your choice is essentially the outcome of confusion. Please do listen to this, because life is becoming very, very difficult. Not only in this country, but in Europe and India and elsewhere. Life has become so uncertain, so painful. There's so much brutality, cruelty. And one must think out all these problems very clearly, so that one is completely free from choice, so that you see for yourself directly what is true. And you cannot do that if you are conditioned, as we are, conditioned by the culture in which we live, conditioned by the climate, the economic structure, by the philosophers, by the saviors, by the church, by the organized religions throughout the world. We are conditioned. Knowledge conditions us. And knowledge is always superficial. Knowledge is the outgoing of thought accumulated through memory, experience, and knowledge is invariably outward. There is no other knowledge, which we'll go into presently. So freedom is absolutely necessary to investigate, to look at the world, to look at ourselves as we are, not according to some philosopher, some psychologist, but to investigate freely into ourselves what we are. And that investigation demands its own discipline. You cannot investigate if your mind is not in order. And you cannot investigate if you are prejudiced, if you are frightened, if you are merely seeking and pursuing pleasure. So discipline implies, in the very root of that meaning, the root meaning of that word is to learn, not to conform, not to suppress, not to imitate, but to learn. And one cannot learn if one is not free, if one is conditioned by one's own prejudices. You're not free to learn. If you are conditioned by your own fear, there's no freedom to learn. If you are merely seeking everlasting pleasure, then that conditions the mind, and therefore it's not free to learn. And here, at least for this evening, we're trying to find out what it means to be conditioned, whether it's a gradual process to uncondition the mind, or can it be done instantly, and to find out for ourselves how to observe not only the world about us, but also the world that is inside, below the skin. And to do that, there must be freedom. If this is what you want, if this is your urgent inquiry, that very urgency makes one very, very serious. Not go off at a tangent. But stick to the point. and pursue it to the very end, which is, I hope, what we will do this evening. Freedom also implies, does it not, that there is no authority in this inquiry. Because you are the teacher and the disciple in yourself. You're inquiring and learning. Therefore, freedom implies this sense of absolute cessation of every kind of authority. Not the authority of law, not the authority of a technician, but the so-called spiritual authority, the hierarchical attitude, which all religions have diligently cultivated, and as the gurus do. So freedom implies a mind that is serious, inquiring, examining, and such examination is not possible when there is prejudice, when there is fear, when there is merely the desire to find deeper and wider pleasure. And all this implies, does it not, that one must know, understand oneself. You know, a great deal has been talked about and written about knowing yourself. The ancients from every country have talked about know yourself. And apparently, no one has done it. They have escaped from themselves into all fanciful, imaginative, speculative philosophy. And the word philosophy means actually the love of truth. The love of truth in daily life, not the love of speculative thought. And to know oneself is the beginning of wisdom, which cannot buy in a book or by following somebody or following a system, whether others have invented it or you have invented it for yourself. So self-knowledge, knowing oneself, implies a great deal. And that's what we are going to do together. Investigate, not through analysis, because analysis is paralysis. Analysis implies a great deal. Analysis implies the analyzer and the analyzed. Analysis implies time. Analysis implies a movement of thought as knowledge, inquiring into another thought, which is also knowledge. And analysis gradually postpones, paralyzes all action. But without analyzing, we're going to look at ourselves. We're going to see, investigate the structure and the nature of the mind, which has created through thought this whole scaffold of the self, the me, to which one has given such enormous importance. Now, is it possible to look at oneself, the images that one has created about oneself, the desires, the failures, the frustrations, the hopes, the faith that one has cultivated through this hope for a future, the faith in an imaginative God or savior or a master or a guru. Can one look at that, this whole structure, which is the structure of thought, which has created the me and the rest of the world around me, can we look at that without analysis and observe actually what it is? I hope you are following what the speaker is saying. I do not know if you have not realized that all our religions, Christianity, whatever religion it is, organized, is based on thought, is the product of thought. And thought is the movement of matter. Thought is the response of memory, response of experience, which is knowledge. On that, all our culture is based, both technologically, artistically, spiritually. All our religions are the product of thought. And thought is a material process. And can we look at ourselves and the movement of thought in which all our minds, all our activities, all our sensual pleasures and so on are based. To look at ourselves without any distortion. Because if you can, then you need no guru. Then you do not need to read a single book about all this business. You may read technological books, but there is no need to read a single book about philosophy, psychology, because everything is in you as a human being, if you know how to look at yourself. Because after all, you are the result, your mind is the result of the collective. You are not individuals, are you? Individuality, the word means indivisible, an entity, a human being who is not fragmented, broken up, divided in himself. And most human beings are fragmented. And so you are actually, in the very word, is misapplied. You are like the collective. You are the result of the collective, of the social structure which thought has created. And that social, environmental culture, with its religion, with its philosophy, with its immorality, has conditioned our minds. So can the mind look at itself, observe, without any distortion? And that's only possible when you understand who is the observer. Are you all interested in all this? Yes? I hope you are. Because it's your life, not mine. I hope you are seriously concerned with your own life and not wasted, not distorted. And our civilization helps us to distort it, to destroy it. Our education, our religious upbringing destroys the capacity to live a life that's whole, not fragmented. A life that's whole, that means sane. And sanity means health. And whole means also holy, H-O-L-Y. And as human beings, we are fragmented. We have divided the world nationally, racially, religiously, economically. The businessman, the artist, the doctor, the scientist, we have broken the human being as specialists. And so we are not individuals at all. We are fragmented human beings. And being fragmented, we think we can put it all together and integrate it. You cannot integrate broken fragments. What one can do is to observe these fragments, how they have come into being, what has divided them, why this division exists. Then out of that observation comes a total sense of wholeness. So one must go into this question of how to observe not only the things that are outer, but also inward. You know, we want to learn. We want to be taught. We go to colleges, schools, universities, or go to some of these classes of the yogis and the gurus and all that. We want to learn. But learning has two qualities. Learning in order to accumulate knowledge, and from that knowledge act skillfully. That's what we do when you go to college, accumulate knowledge in order to live in the outward world skillfully with what we have learned, technologically and so on. There is also another form of learning. Learning which is never the accumulation of knowledge. And to learn about ourselves, not according to any philosopher or any psychologist and all the rest of those people, but to learn about ourselves. And there comes the difficulty. Please do listen to this. When you look at yourself freely, without fear, without prejudice, you examine yourself, and by examination, through examination, you learn what you are. And that becomes knowledge. And with that knowledge, you again look at yourself. So the previous knowledge conditions your observation of the next movement of thought. You're following what I'm saying? That is, I look at myself, born in India, a Brahmin, with all their culture and superstition and their feeling of superiority, ugliness, and all the rest of that ugliness that goes with that particular arrogant class, conditioned by tradition if you are, entering into European world, conditioned by their culture. You're all that. You look at yourself. I look at myself. And in looking, observing my thoughts, my feelings, my activities, my despairs and agonies and all the rest of that human beings go through, by looking at oneself, one learns how a certain reaction has come into being. The mistake that one made, the arrogant expression, the vanity, the violence. And through examination, you have learned a little part of yourself. And that learning has become knowledge, has it not? And with that knowledge, you next examine. You examine the next movement of your reaction, of your thought, of your feeling, of your desire. So, you are never free to look afresh at the next reaction without the previous knowledge. You're following all this? Do, please. It's really very interesting if you go into yourself very deeply. So, the previous understanding, previous learning, the previous knowledge impedes, hinders the examination of the fresh movement of a feeling. You distort that feeling. So is it possible to be free from knowledge of that kind, to examine afresh so that your mind is capable of seeing directly without the previous conditioning? You understand my question? Because it's very important to understand this. Because that is the very essence of freedom. That the previous knowledge conditions the mind, and so it is incapable of examining a new movement of thought, a new reaction. And so one asks, what place has knowledge? What place has knowledge in the world, not only outwardly, but inwardly? In the world, in this inward world that's so complex, so contradictory, so limited. You understand my question? What place has knowledge in the transformation of man and society? That's what we are concerned for the moment. What place has knowledge in the examination or the observation of myself? Will the previous knowledge acquired or gathered from another will help to observe Or must there be freedom from knowledge to observe? So I must go into the whole question of the observer. I hope we are thinking together, sharing this thing together, journeying together. Otherwise, my talking about it is quite useless. If you are not at the same level at the same time, which is the very essence of love, then communication comes to an end. So one hopes that we are sharing this thing together. Therefore, it's your responsibility to share, not to merely learn and accumulate as knowledge and act according to that knowledge. Therefore, that denies freedom. So as we said, we must inquire into this question of who is the observer. Because that's what we are doing. We are observing the world, all that is going on in the scientific field, in the world that is violent, brutal, war, starvation, poverty, and the affluent society of this country, where there is also great poverty. Not poverty of prosperity, but inward poverty. You are terribly poor people inwardly. Terribly. And being poor, you are gullible. You'll accept, try anything for a while and then drop it. Go to something else, which all indicates an extraordinary sense of inward insufficiency, inward poverty, inward loneliness. And to inquire together, for I am not your authority, for the speaker is not your guru. Thank God. He is not your leader, teacher. He has nothing to do with propaganda to tell you what to do, but to observe, share what is being said so that it is yours, not someone else's, so that you are independent, free human beings. So we must go into this question of who is the observer. When you look at the war that's going on in Vietnam, the fear of threat of war in the Middle East, the appalling poverty in India, and the things that are going on in this country, the vulgarity, the noise, the everlasting desire to be entertained, the inundation of the Oriental thought in the shape of gurus, yogis, and their magazines and their dances and their stupidities, How do you observe them all? How do you look at them? Are you separate from them? Are you capable of looking dispassionately? Or are you frightened, uncertain, unclear, confused, wanting to get something, to attain something, attain peace, enlightenment, nirvana, God knows what else you want? Have you observed all this? And how do you observe? With what eyes? With what kind of mind? With what kind of heart do you observe all the things that are going on in this appalling world? How do you look? Do you look at it as an American? Whatever that word may mean. Do you look at it with eyes that are satisfied, angry, prejudiced, hatred, jealousy, and so on? Do you look at it with those eyes? Or do you look at it with eyes that are clear, without any prejudice, without any conditioning? Because if you have such eyes, then you know what love is, what compassion is. And it's only compassion that can solve all our problems. But unfortunately, we haven't got such eyes. Our eyes and our heart and our minds are conditioned by our affluency, by the culture in which we live. It is competitive, selfish, immoral. So we observe the outward world in this distorted way. And also we observe ourselves, if we at all ever do, either with fear, with condemnation, or rationalization, or justification. Look at ourselves with the image that one has built about ourselves. The image imposed by society, the image which we have created for ourselves about ourselves. Again, these images, these conclusions, these speculative assertions, which are really prejudices, distort our inward look. So it's very important, it seems to me, to learn not from another, because what you learn from another is his prejudice, his dogma, his conclusion, his arrogance, his ignorance and stupidity. But if you can learn about yourself by observing yourself, then out of that learning there comes freedom. So, the observer, when you look at the world as an Englishman, German, Italian, or an American, or a Russian as a communist, as a socialist, as a capitalist, world as an architect, as a scientist, because you are specialized, then you bring about not only in yourself but in the outer world this fragmentation. So, can you look at yourself without any distortion? And you can, if you see the truth, that to understand oneself, there must be no distortion. If you see instantly that truth. And that truth can be seen instantly when your mind is not conditioned by your religion, by your culture, by your own imaginative, fanciful desires. You know, we are so conditioned to accept gradual understanding, gradual perception, gradual seeing the truth of something. But I think that gradual process of understanding is sheer nonsense. Because when you want to understand something, immediately you do about yourself. That for that immediacy, you must have energy. You must have the intensity to find out. Here, you're conditioned. Take one thing, conditioned by your religion. I'm taking that as an example. Or by intellectual conclusions, which has fanciful prejudices. You are conditioned by a conclusion. Look what that conclusion does. You have your conclusion, another has his conclusion. And that divides you, as belief does. Where there is division, nationally, politically, religiously, the division of conclusions, there must be conflict. And conflict is the very essence of violence. Now, if you see that, the truth of it, not the verbal explanation, the verbal comprehension of that explanation. Because that which is explained, that which is described, the description is not the described. So if you see the truth, that any form of division in oneself and in the world must inevitably breed conflict. The Arab and the Jew, the communist and the socialist and so on, the division. between you and me, we and they. The division between the one who knows and the one does not know. The guru and the disciple, which is a division. And that must inevitably, logically, bring about conflict. If you see the truth of that, and you can if you apply your mind, then you will see that this whole idea of hierarchical progress, gradually unconditioning, step by step, or jump from one state to another conditioning and go beyond it, becomes utter nonsense. So, we have created the division between the observer and the observed in ourselves. Have we not? When you look at yourself, you are the observer, and what you are looking at is something different from the observed, from the observer. Isn't that so? When you say, I am greedy, I am arrogant, I am this or that, and I must be different, when you say that, you have divided the observer from the observed, haven't you? So, in that division, there is conflict. There is the desire to control, to change, to bring about a satisfactory conclusion. Now, is the observer different from the observed? You understand my question? Am I talking Greek? Or have you gone to sleep? Or are you actually sharing what we're talking about together? Therefore, you're giving attention. It's your problem. You have to solve this. It's your life. Whether you're young or old. So, is the observer, this says, I am watching myself, I am watching myself, there is a division in that. Is the I who is watching different from the thing which is being watched? Therefore, do see the truth of that. Not my explanation and the understanding of that explanation, but the truth that there is no division between the observer and the observed. That is, the observer is the observed. When you see that as truth, then conflict in yourself comes totally to an end. But then quite a different thing takes place. When the observer is the observed, then there is only the observed, not the observer. When there is division as the observer and the observed, there is conflict. There is the desire to control it, to suppress it, to go beyond it, to conquer it, and so on, so on. All that is a wastage of energy. But when there is only the observed, not the observer, observing, watching that which he is seeing, then you have the energy, then there is that energy to go beyond the observed, beyond what is. So it is very important to find out how to observe. Don't go to schools or classes to learn how to observe. That's your tendency in this country. You go to schools how to become sensitive. Or go to some community where it will teach you how to become sensitive. And when you learn how to become sensitive, you are no longer sensitive. For God's sake, be simple. So, it's very important to understand this for yourself. Not from my explanation, not what the speaker is saying, but this is a fact. This is the truth. See it for yourself. Then this conflict in yourself comes to an end. And therefore, you as a human being have no violence. Because what you observe, what you see is yourself without the division. And therefore, there is no you and me, we and they, the Jew and the Gentile, and all the rest of it. Inwardly, also. The division between the observer who says, I am greedy, and I must do something about that greedy or that violence, brings about a conflict. And that conflict is another form of violence, where there is the truth, the understanding, not intellectual, but the fact that the observer is the observed, brings about a totally different freedom, in which there is no conflict whatsoever. And to learn about oneself is to observe without the observer. To observe, to see, without distortion, without prejudice, without fear. And out of this observation, you begin to understand the nature and the structure of fear and pleasure. Because those are the two things, fundamental issues or principles in our life. And we perhaps, next time we meet, Saturday morning, we can go into that. But we have these problems as human beings. These problems cannot be solved by another. Because for the solution of the problem is in the problem itself, not in the organized groups. You know, there is a lovely thing I used to talk about, which is Two friends were walking down the street one day. One walked a little ahead and picked up something off the street, a dirty street, much traveled upon. Looks at it and says, "What?" And his face brightens, he's cheerful, he's extraordinarily radiant. And he puts it in his pocket. And the friend says, as a little later, "What did you pick up that made you look so radiant, so happy?" The friend said, "Oh, that was truth I picked up. And I'm going to keep it." And the other friend says, "Don't keep it, let us organize it." Do you want to ask any questions about what we have talked about? Before you ask questions, if you want to, it's very important to find out who is going to answer your question. But we must ask questions. We must have doubt, skepticism. But doubt and skepticism must be kept on a leash, as you keep a dog on a leash, to know when to let it go and to know when to hold it back. Otherwise, doubt and skepticism destroy people. So we must ask questions. And also find out for yourself who is going to answer it. If you are waiting for an answer from another, that answer is going to condition you, is going to destroy you. But when you share that question with another, in the inquiry of that question, in the sharing of that question, in the problem that troubles one, then there is no one to answer you. But the very inquiry into the question, there is the answer in the question. Which does not mean that you mustn't ask question of the speaker. The speaker is not, by stating that, preventing you from asking. If you have no questions.
Will they?
Yes, sir.
Do we speak into a loudspeaker?
I can hear you. I can hear you and others speaking.
And others hear? Because while I wish to ask a question, I would also like to include, by your definition, what I hope is an answer. I do not have much doubt or skepticism over your observation of the importance that we look into ourselves. But must we equate conflict with violence? As the water of the seas bash the rocks of the shore, as the branches of a river go in divergent ways, Are we not constantly in our lives, within our own selves, faced with the dilemma and the conflict of our greed and our kindness? If we are to accept all conflict as violence, are we not precluding the importance that while there is conflict in nature and conflict in man, we can reconcile this conflict by the important word you used, compassion? And is not that the bridge in the dilemma of our conflict?
Are you saying, sir, I hope you have heard the question? I don't know what you're laughing at, but I ask if you have heard the question. Gentleman asks, why do you equate conflict with violence? Nature is violent, the reverse, in all the business. We human beings are supposed to be a little more intelligent and must solve this problem of violence. When a wild animal kills a deer, when a tiger destroys a cow, that's part of nature. That is its nature. If you accept that human beings, by their nature, are violent, and that it is necessary to be violent, that's part of our innate structure. Then we'll create a society as we have, a violent, competitive, aggressive, brutal, all the rest of it. And the question also is, can this violence be transcended, gone beyond? And the gentleman pointed out that the speaker used the word compassion. You know, compassion is something that you cannot come by through the conquering of violence. It is totally unrelated to violence. The word compassion means passion for all things. Passion is not lust, is not the act of determination or will. Passion comes from the word suffer, suffering. When you understand deeply, fully, what is suffering and the freedom from suffering, then there is compassion. But the freedom from violence is not necessarily compassionate. See, one has to go into the question of what is freedom. Is freedom from something freedom? You understand my question, sir? Right, sir. Sorry. I wish you had told me earlier. is freedom from violence. That is, freedom from violence. Is that freedom not a reaction? And is there a freedom which is not from something, but freedom per se? So I'm asking, as we human beings living in this world, which we are slowly and gradually destroying, because of our greed, for various economic reasons and so on, this violence that we have accumulated, inherited, cultivated, is it not possible to be free from it, not as an ideal, to become non-violent, that just non-existent, that's just a political jargon? To be free from violence is one thing, and to feel this sense of total freedom, not from anything, which is the very essence of intelligence. And intelligence is not the cultivation of knowledge. Intelligence is wholly different from knowledge. One can be free, put away through greater observation, understanding the sense of violence in oneself. I don't know if you have gone into this question, how important it is. Oh, may I go on a little bit? May I go on? Sorry, a little bit, no more. You know, human consciousness, that's your consciousness, is the consciousness of the world. Is it? What you think and feel, they feel the same thing in India or in Russia. Feel. Your consciousness is the consciousness of the world. And that consciousness can be affected. Hitler affected that consciousness. Stalin affected that consciousness. The priests in the name of Jesus affected consciousness. The priest, not the human being. So, if you transform yourself, you affect the world consciousness. You understand? If you understand the nature of violence, the whole complexity of it, not say, well, world nature is violent, therefore it's all right for me to be violent. But the violence that human beings feel, their anger, their hatred, their jealousy, their antagonism, all that's involved in that word violence. And it is part of that consciousness of human beings. And when there is transcending, going beyond that violence, you affect the totality of the human consciousness. Sorry, I must.